Good morning and welcome back. Broadcasting live from Anchorage, Alaska. It's Arctic Fire. What were we called again? Arctic Fire 2012. When these amazing bladesmiths that have come from all over the world to participate in this event showed up, we, of course, because we live in a world full of lawyers and lawsuits, had to have them all sign a release. And part of this release had to do with, we're doing inherently risky things. You may get hurt or die and so on. But I don't think many of them realized that the biggest threat to their health they would face here was sleep deprivation. Since when you just get this many guys together that are as passionate about the craft as we all are, it's hard to find that to not just tell one more story or have one more discussion. So, but we're here. And we're soldiering on, and we have an amazing lineup again for you today. Take a look at the broadcast schedule. That's arcticfire2012.com. I keep wondering why I keep telling you that, because if you're seeing this, you obviously know where to go. But if the broadcast schedule is a link up there, you can look at that and see what we've got coming up. And this morning, we are very fortunate indeed to have Jake, who's generously agreed to do not the one, but two presentations. As you probably know, if you don't, shame on you, Jake is just an amazing wood carver and also obviously a bladesmith. And he adorns his work with elaborate carvings which are informed by the Nordic and Celtic traditions. And if you caught his presentation yesterday, he did a wonderful job of showing what the historic and mythic inspiration he draws from. And today he has agreed to show us how he takes these very simple tools of his and creates these beautiful carvings. So pay attention. Maybe you'll learn something. Take it away, Jake.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm going to be demonstrating how I carve ornamentation in wood to embellish scabbards and grips. So the carving I'm going to be doing is Mammon style. It's inspired by this period called the Mammon period in ornamentation in Viking Scandinavia. So I don't know if you can see the book here. I've got what I start out with is I start out with a sketch, or for these purposes today I've started out with a sketch. Sometimes I'll do my sketch directly on the wood. I've got a blank piece of wood. This isn't actually a scabbard, but it's the rough shape of a small scabbard. So I'm going to draw my image onto this piece of wood. I have another piece of wood that I've already started carving. I put 2 hours into this piece. And so hopefully I'll be able to go through the process from beginning to end in about an hour here. So I'm going to start out by drawing this image on here. I don't know if there's anything I need to tell you before I start, but maybe I'll just start. And then I guess at the end of this hour, I'm going to show you. I put together a little slideshow and a short movie of a sword that I have at home that just gives you an idea of how, from carving the ornamentation to the finished product, how you can use carved ornamentation in a sword. So I'm going to start out by drawing this knotwork on here. I use my fingers to measure things quite a bit. I'm just going to use this. And this is a thing, my grandfather was a cabinet maker, and he taught me that you can scribe a line by resting your knuckle on the edge of a piece of wood, and then you get a nice straight line. So you can kind of define the edges of where you want to draw, where you want your image to go. And then you just kind of start sketching in your knotwork. So I'm very sketchy to begin with. The lines can change because when you're doing a knotwork, you need the lines need to meet up when you do your over-unders. So basically, these are a bunch of chords that are looping over and under each other. And they all have to be able to fit because it's a kind of a basket weave. So I just roughly put them in there to begin with. And a lot of the things, this particular style, mammon style, they're gripping beasts, and they have parts of their bodies, like you'll see what I'm drawing right now, is actually an antler coming out of the head of this creature. But then the antler curves around and becomes a wing. And then you have like legs that are kind of coming out of the body. And when I'm doing this, I'm inspired by I'm very inspired by the ancient stuff, but I'm not necessarily, I'm not doing a reproduction of a specific design. Often it's very, very close, but I'll add my own sensibility to, especially to the faces of the creatures, and sometimes to the entire knotwork. So I like to make them a little bit, give them a little bit of an ambiguous expression on their face, depending on the project. And I've spent a lot of time looking at real critters to get the sense of, because these people who were designing these monsters, they were very, very familiar with, they lived in close proximity to animals all the time. They probably had cattle living in their home with them. So I kind of bring the mouth joint down to the corner of the snout there. So now I've got a rough drawing of the creature. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to establish where chords go over each other. And where they pass under. All right, and I think this will work. I'm using a 4B pencil, so it's easier to erase. And then I can kind of just get rid of the lines that I don't want. Pencils are wonderful things. I used to do it in pencil and then draw over it with pen, but I don't do that anymore. I think it was kind of procrastinating. Because, how nice this drawing is only important as far as the forms that you're creating, not how sketchy it looks, or it's just a guide for your chisel. The really important marks are the marks you cut into the wood, which I'm going to be doing in a minute. So I've got these lines kind of pretty well established. And these little spirals are very visually attractive. So it's important to get these spirals just right. Because I think it's maybe part of we're kind of hardwired to pick out eyes. And I think it's an ancient kind of prey instinct to be able to see an eye, or maybe a hunting instinct, looking out at you from complicated forms like tangled branches. So when we see these round spiral shapes, it's kind of like an eye, but then it's this pleasing, natural shape, and it peeks out from this complex bunch of tangled lines and draws you into the image. So having them be really nicely rounded and visually pleasing is important. So I'm just going to draw in these little feathers on the wing there. So there, I've drawn it in. It's not exactly the size of the one that I'll be finishing. So I'm just going to work on this eye a little bit here. These details of the face of the creature are also really, really, really important. So like, little subtle changes in the placement of the eye will make a big difference in how what kind of emotions you'll imagine in the face of this creature, whether it'll look like a toy or like something that might eat you or something that's happy. So you want it to be, for me, I want my creatures to look a little bit ambiguous, like they've got their own reasons for doing things that you might not know about, which may or may not include eating you. Anyway, so that's I've got that drawn in. These are my tools that I use right here. Mostly I use these two tools. This is a skew chisel here, and this is a straight chisel, and that is really all you need to do carving, and sandpaper for the way I carve it anyway. And I have no training in carving except for just playing with wood and chisels from a young age. So the first thing I'm going to do, or the next step, actually I've got to do a little bit more drawing. I'm going to, let me look at this. I've got to make sure I know where all these lines are going. I'll be putting grace lines in like this, and I need them to be drawn in here because this arm comes in underneath the edge of the dragon and goes in under a grace line. So it's good to know where those are going to be, even though I won't cut them in right away. And having grace lines, they complicate something that's actually fairly simple. These knotworks often look very, very complicated before you've become familiar with them. You can look at them and think that they're much more complicated than they actually are. But part of what makes that illusion is by doubling these lines, by just putting little grace lines. And okay, there we go. So now I'm going to cut this in. And it's surprising how time-consuming this process is. Like, I've just spent 15 minutes just drawing this picture. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the skew chisel, and I'm just going to be very carefully cut the lines in. And I carve on my knee. This is probably not a very good idea for people at home. You can cut yourself really badly, and it's surprising, but the most dangerous thing I do as a bladesmith is carving. I've hurt myself more carving than doing anything else. Much, much more than getting burned, because you're taking this tool that is extremely sharp and pointy, and you're applying a great deal of force to it. And then trying to also control it and not slip. And if you're not careful, you can slip and really badly cut yourself. So you just have to be, and that's why you should use a vise and not carve on your knee like I'm doing. But I guess that's one of the disadvantages to not being trained in And something is you pick up habits of how you do things, and that's the way it's easiest for you to do them. Are you able to see that? Yeah? Okay, so I've cut these lines in. You'll see that this, because it's a round tool, I can turn it, and that's one of the things that's really great is you can take your tool, and this is one of the reasons that I carve on my knee, is because I can make very delicate adjustments just by moving my body and rotating the chisel as I'm cutting it. You can see it. I don't know if you can see that.
Jake, when you're doing a complicated knotwork like this, do you usually start with removing the upper layers or the lower levels of the knots?
I was just asked if when I'm doing a complicated knotwork, I remove the upper layers or the lower layers of the knot. I don't really know how to answer that. I'll show you. I take away the edges first. So, and I follow the pattern. So I just kind of encounter things. It's like driving down the road. You kind of you come to crossroads and you go in the direction you're driving. So this is what I do. I continue to cut these lines in until I've cut all the lines in, and I have a pattern that looks something like this. You can see where I've cut the lines in. So I'll do a little bit more, and feel free, guys in the audience, to ask questions if you have anything. If it's not clear what I'm doing, or you think I could explain something more, let me know. Oh, this will be a good thing to show you, is how to carve a spiral. So I don't know if you can see this, but okay, good. So we're going to just turn the piece as I cut the spiral in, like that. And you have to apply quite a lot of pressure while you're doing this. This is one of the things when you're carving, is it's this combination of being very still and applying a lot of force at the same time. You end up getting a sore back. So that's the spiral cut in.
Can you talk a bit about the type of wood you're using?
Okay, so the type of wood I'm using is this is rock maple or sugar maple. This is the type of maple wood that they get maple syrup from. And it's a very common tree where I live. And sometimes it grows in these wonderfully strange ways that cause it to have an incredible figure in the wood. You can see this has not been oiled. This is just what this wood looks like. And this is what they use for making the back of violins. But I also get some of this wood that's bird's eye maple, and you'll see some stuff that's, people like to grade things and say, well, this is this number and type of wood. This is special fiddleback curly maple. But for me, I like the weirdness of it. So I try to find wood that's just weird looking and refracts light everywhere. And the piece that I'm going to finish with, like I've drawn this onto this piece of wood, the piece that I'm going to finish with is a piece of bird's eye maple where the eyes, which are these, I don't even know what they are. It's like a disease or something in the wood that causes it. But the tree's the trees grow to full size, but it just refracts light everywhere. And this particular piece of wood, the eyes aren't fully formed. So what it looks like when you oil it is it looks like a surface of water that has been spattered with raindrops. There's just all these concentric circles, all kind of like bumping up against each other, and it's really, really lovely. Okay, so there I've cut enough of these lines in for our purposes today. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my straight chisel. Wait, I have to cut the face in. There we go. Now, the way I'm going to carve this is something that I came up with after seeing Jim Kelso's work with Netsuke carving, and he was doing a piece that was a bat carved in, I think it was in ebony, and he carved it. Carving is essentially very much like drawing. This is bas-relief carving, so it's very, very shallow. It's like probably less than a millimeter deep, the carving. But so what you're doing is you're playing with shadows. You're creating a space that just inhibits the light from running across it and creates a shadow, and so it actually looks deeper than it is. And Jim was carving a bat, but he was carving it scooped out, so it was inverse carving. And because it looked like, but when you looked at it from a distance, it looked like it was on top. It looked like it was sitting on top of the piece of wood. It's an incredible illusion and very beautiful. And so after watching that, I started doing some things where I was carving away, leaving the surface of the wood flush and then carving down. So instead of carving away the background and having the knotwork be sitting on top of the wood, I leave the background flush. I've already got it all nice and sanded, and I just carve it down and leave these edges to make a nice shadow line around the piece. And it's almost like doing a pencil drawing and then outlining it with a dark pencil. So that's what I'm going to be doing with this carving. And I'm not used to talking while I carve. So we're just carving down here. And I'm going to keep these lines on the edges. I'll angle them out a little bit. But you just remove wood from the places you don't want there to be wood. And until it looks like the way you want it to look. And you'll know when it looks the way you want it to look, and you'll know when it doesn't. And it can be very, very frustrating when it doesn't look the way you want it to look. And you're like, you don't know why. And so this process teaches you to be, I don't know if patient is the word. I'm not a patient person. I'm a stubborn person. But you do have to learn how to be patient, and you also have to learn to be patient with yourself, because when you're doing something like this and you haven't been doing it for a long time, so you don't have the experience of knowing what's going wrong when something isn't looking the way you want it to look. I'm going to cut this mouth from the underside of the line. There we go. This is just a simple line that has a huge amount of power in the carving. But yeah, you have to trust yourself, and when you don't know what's wrong, and instead of giving up and saying, "Oh well, it's good enough," you just have to kind of step back and say,
well, obviously I know what's wrong because I can see that this isn't looking the way I want it to look. And then just give yourself time and trust yourself, and you'll know what to do. Go in and carve a little bit of a corner off. The thing about carving is that this is, minute differences in the height of the wood make a huge difference in the way it looks. It's all an illusion on the surface of a flat plane. So. Is that Yule? Yeah, Yule just asked me if there's a point where the pencil lines start to become distracting. No, not really. And if they do, you just sand them away. I kind of work. I work in a kind of trance. Like when I'm carving, I don't really know what's going on around me, and I'm not aware of what I'm doing in a kind of analytical sense while I'm working. So it's actually kind of challenging carving and talking about how I'm carving while I'm doing it, because when I'm actually carving, I'm not thinking. I'm thinking in a non-verbal language of shapes and the flow of the knife through the wood, and I only have a sense of, and also it's like, I'm always talking about storytelling, but that's the essential part of, for me, what I do. Is telling a story, and when I'm carving, I'm telling a story that only I can hear, and it involves this creature that I'm creating, and I have a sense of the personality of the thing that I'm making while I'm making it. So I start to have this kind of sympathy, like if you're, brushing a horse and you have a sense of the horse's personality. I get that feeling when I'm carving creatures. I have a sense of what this creature feels like. I'm not thinking about the surface of the material while I'm carving. I'm thinking about the shape of the critter. I don't know if that made any sense. Possibly not. Alright. So we're going to carve an eye in here. Yeah, I'm going to switch to the next guy soon because we've been doing this for a while. So I keep on like this for some time. And right here, I'm doing the eye. This is a very, very important part of making this creature have emotion. Or not. And one of the things that's fascinating about these kind of Germanic carvings of animals is that a lot of them don't have emotion, and it has this really specific effect on the viewer. Like when you look at that critter, its lack of emotion has this kind of mystical feeling to it. There's something a little bit alarming about something that's there with an eye that you can't recognize what it's feeling. And you'll see that if you look at some fish, like there's wolf fish and things like that. They're kind of alarming looking creatures with these big, emotionless, wet eyes. And I think that's kind of a neat thing about some of these carvings is the monsters aren't menacing, but in their lack of menace, they are kind of menacing. So this is just, taking tiny little pieces of wood away. And it's funny how small the pieces of wood that you take away are sometimes. It still makes a difference in what the carving looks like.
Do you sometimes find that you're tempted to put in another layer of detail or another layer of dimension or volume? Like in the carving of that eye, you might be tempted to hint at the eyelid or the shadow under the eyelid, but that would somehow force you to add that same amount of extra detail or definition to the rest of the animal. So you sort of, in this situation, this point of the carving, you'll have to make. It's a small decision, but it would affect the overall effect of the whole creature. Are you contemplating these things when you are carving, or are you completing your plan? How much of it hangs in the balance as you're sort of carving it?
Oh, it's all in the balance while I'm carving. I do walk that line, because you're, as a contemporary person from this time that we live in, we have a very advanced sense of design and the ability to create realism. Like, we have this incredible font of knowledge about making realistic images of creatures. So it is really tempting to make the creature look more realistic, and I could, but what I like about the ancient pieces is the weird combination of symbolism and like the idea that you're trying to make something look real, but this is the level that your tradition of realism has come to. So yeah, so I guess I think that, and sometimes I'll make the creatures be more realistic, and more so that maybe the face is more realistic, and you have a sense of a real creature emerging from something that's symbolic, and it depends on the story that I'm telling with the piece. If the ornamentation is part of an imaginary culture, because when I'm creating these pieces, these are contemporary pieces, so all history in reference to a contemporary sword is imaginary in the craftsman's head. So I'm imagining some culture, and I'm imagining the craftsman that would make this creature, and then what the craftsman imagines the creature represents, and what the creature is in the craftsman's head. So I do play with those ideas while I'm carving, and sometimes I'll do that, and sometimes not. But in this case, recently I've come to really enjoy making blank eyes that are these lovely round shapes, but that are kind of emotionless. Okay, so now I'm going to carve around, and I'm going to just show you the other carving. I'm going to switch soon. So I've carved this along. I've put 2 hours of work into this piece here. So this actually takes quite a long time to do. Yes. So what I've done here is I'm taking the background. If you can see on this one, I'm taking the background and I'm leaving it flush. And I have to make a decision about when I'm doing the over-unders. I can't have like these little tiny fins coming out here and here, because they wouldn't actually create the effect of depth. They would just be visually confusing. So I carve these sections down to below the knotwork right here. But I leave these sections up, and what I'm doing is I'm actually cutting the edges at an angle. So if you look at these edges, they're kind of a V shape, and that way you get this really nice big thick line outlining the knotwork with shadow. So I'm going to switch to this one now. So this is what I would do. I'd keep carving the way I'm carving and carve these over-unders. And then I'm going to continue on this carving and finish doing the over-under, so that at the end of this, in the next 20 minutes maybe, I'll have finished carving. I don't know if it's going to work out. It's funny because when I'm doing this, I have no sense of time passing. You get absorbed in your work and you don't think about how long it takes, but it's pretty tedious. But the thing that I find, I don't, when I'm polishing a sword, it is tedious. There's no getting lost in the work and you look up and 8 hours have passed. It's like, oh my God, I wish I was done polishing. But with carving, because when you're polishing, you really can't see the change is so minute. It's not that exciting. But with carving, this thing is constantly emerging. Kind of like when Yule was polishing the yellow away, and you could see this dragon start to emerge. You want to keep polishing. So I start out with, when I'm carving these round, I start out by cutting the edges away and bringing it down to a background. And when I'm doing the over-unders, I start quite far away from the place that it's going to go under, so that it's not a sudden plunge or like a valley because I want it to look organic. I want the wood to look like it's actually weaving underneath something, and that it naturally should be weaving underneath the thing that it's going under. So I'm cutting that at a bit of an angle so you get that nice line, nice shadow line there.
Conscious of the grain, or is that irrelevant?
Don just asked me if I'm conscious of the grain. And yes, you have to be conscious of the grain, and that's why I'm carving it freehand instead of in a vise, because you'll notice that I'm constantly moving the piece around, and that's what you have to do. I've been carving for a long time, so I don't actually have any kind of theory attached to being conscious of the grain. And I've heard a lot of people say that maple is very hard to carve. I don't feel like it is, but that's this. I carve a lot of maple, and I carve bog oak and stuff. Bog oak is challenging to carve because it's very splintery, and it has, oak is an open grained wood, so it has two different types of grain. But you can see here the grain is going this way on this section. So when I cut into that, I may encounter a snag, although, yeah, like right there, it's kind of resisting me. But my tool is sharp, so it's okay. But what I do is, when you're working with wood, you'll come up against something where it wants to catch your blade and it wants to split along the grain. And so if the grain is going this way, well, you just flip it and carve from the other direction. And then it's fine. So you kind of, you develop an instinct for working with the grain. If it tells you no, like I'm going to split, if you carve this way, you just turn it around and carve from the other direction, instead of fighting with it. And having sharp tools makes a huge difference. Like, as you're carving on a big project, your tool gets duller from use, and you start to struggle, and eventually you get up and sharpen it, and then you come back and everything's better. So having sharp tools is a valuable thing to have. And I'm actually not that great at sharpening them. I just get them sharp enough. I'm good at sharpening swords, but swords are such a different thing than a chisel. It's well, first of all, you have 3 feet of metal to hold on to when you're sharpening a sword edge, and when you're sharpening a tiny little chisel, you've got this big long thing sticking out from the edge, so it's challenging. I mostly do my sharpening by hand on the chisels instead of with a grinder. But eventually, when you use them a lot, they really get worn away. So you have to redress the edge on the grinder. So you can see I'm starting back here and trying to move this around. And that, like having this plane start to come down gives this lovely, it gives this really fluid motion to the design that draws your audience's eye in. And the other thing I find about it is it's kind of beguiling because of the twisty nature of it. At first, your eye can't figure out what it's looking at, so it has to look more closely. So it's a way of drawing your audience into the story of your piece. And for me, every object, whether it's intended or not, it's irrelevant. Whether you intend for an object to tell a story, every object tells a story by the world that it implies by its existence. So when you're making an object that doesn't make sense in your time period, like a sword with animistic carvings on it, you have to be aware that you're consciously telling a story. Or, if you're not conscious of it, you probably should be, because your object implies a story. And if you know what the story that it implies is, then your object's going to be much better at telling that story. And the story will be more consistent with itself. And and so the little subtleties of the carving are part of the story. It's like a painting, like the composition of a painting, how it can help direct the eyes of your viewer.
Hey, Jake.
Yes.
So we make these objects that are deeply inspired by history, and you've spoken several times of yourself as a contemporary sword maker, and I consider myself a contemporary bladesmith. And I'm wondering if you have to educate your audience about what you're doing and why it's not necessarily a reproduction of something, or it's doing things that aren't necessarily historically accurate. Do you find that you kind of have to explain that from time to time?
Yeah, I guess so. And I think that, but I've kind of stopped explaining it explicitly, I think, to a certain extent. And it might be because I have a website that has years and years of things that I've written about it on there. But I think that what I'm doing is I'm communicating with the work. I'm using the work as a kind of visual, as a visual storytelling tool. And so when I'm telling, but I'm also using words to describe what I'm doing, and I'm writing about it. And I think that you can do this without having to explicitly explain it. You can just show people. They can see that what you're doing is not, isn't a reproduction of a historical object, and also, I try to make it clear that I'm not making reproductions of historical objects, but that I'm making things that are inspired by history, and I think that you can tell that story without having to spend a lot of time, because people get bored if you're talking about if you have to explain it too specifically. So what I do is I trust my audience, and I think that the people who are looking at this get it, and people who don't get it, then that's absolutely fine, and they don't have to look at it. That's the thing that's kind of cool about the internet, is you can go, no, that's not interesting. I'm gonna go look at Britney Spears or something. So I don't know if I answered that question properly. My brain's not working. Carving and talking is challenging. But what do you think about that, Yul? Did I answer that question, or did I just kind of get distracted and wander off into blethering?
No. I think you answered that question, but it's a funny one to be making. I like to think a lot of us here maybe make objects that, instead of maybe could have been, they're objects that should have been. Or
yeah.
That,
That's good. Yeah, and that's true. I realized a couple years ago, because I used to take the history and imagining this place, like I used to hold it in a really a special place in my heart, and you know, it was kind of like I really cared about these ancient places, and you know, it almost hurts. You want that, you want this ancient world to be so real. It's a little boy thing, you know, where your imagination is so powerful that it hurts. It's a painful thing, you know. It's not pleasant. And I realized that this painfully beautiful historical place only exists in my imagination. It's not real. It's not a place that ever existed anywhere except for right now inside my head. And that it's inspired by history. But so once I realized that history is imaginary, you know, my experience of history is the only thing that's actually real are that there are these objects left from these ancient people, and we make theories up about them that we can't ever really be 100% sure are true. And you know, we can be quite certain about things. But what I imagine, because I take those objects and I take that history and I imagine people and a place and a culture, and that's different for every person. You know, every person imagines a slightly different past. And so once you realize that you're imagining history, you're free to just be imaginative about your interpretation of these objects and not have to, like you said, you will make them as objects that should have been rather than objects that were. Because, I mean, they didn't carve wooden handles on swords, and they didn't carve the scabbards. Like, this is just me doing something that's referring to how I imagine things from stories, really. So
I think you brought up something that is really interesting, because a big part of this can be communicating with your audience or with people. Well, it is about communicating with people around you, making these things. It's inevitable, as you say. It's going to be storytelling one way or the other, even if you are aware of it or not. And this question about, is this accurate? Is this historically accurate? The question that you can often get from customers is like searching for some kind of confirmation, like, can I believe in this? I see this is interesting, I see this is beautiful, or I'm not sure if I think this is beautiful, so at least is it true? This thing that there is a search for the absolute in, you know, that would seal this object, that would make it complete because it's also true on a level that goes outside the object itself. It connects to a past time or an authentic technique or an authentic material in a way that, I can be at rest now because I know it's true, you know. And so that's an aspect of work that can sort of satisfy doubts. So if an object like the one you're making, if it's beautiful in its own right, if it's complete in its beauty and its care in its making, if there's a harmony between the attention you put in the carving and the beauty of the design and sort of the overall effect it has when it comes together, it is its own authenticity. It is its own history, and it's become a historical artifact. It's just that this artifact, it's very, very young, but it's a completeness. And this is something that we, at least that I am very much drawn into with this historical object, is that they have this sense of completeness and they belong to something in such a very, very rich way. So part of this quest for historical accuracy, you put it really well in saying that this is a kind of longing for completing something.
Well, I kind of view what I do as I'm like a dream archaeologist, and I'm taking these are archaeological finds that I've discovered inside my dreams. So I'm taking objects from my dreams, which are profoundly inspired by history and, you know, who knows, maybe heredity or just literature that I've read, but they're subconscious, and so there's this truth in subconsciousness that's kind of that informs the work, and so that's my goal as a craftsman and an artist, is to create artifacts of dreams. And yeah, and so and also, but it's very, very important that they're authentic, that they're not but I think that there is an authenticity in that when you're being true to yourself when you're creating this stuff, even if it's really weird, which it should be, you know.
Jake, a more technical question on carving. It seems like you use the long underneath of the chisel sometimes to shape, to press, and then cut with the edge. Do you find yourself doing that? Is that a proto-finishing technique, or are you actually moving a lot of wood?
I'm using it when I'm like doing like this kind of thing. Oh, sorry. Oh, that's a hard question to repeat. Okay, so you're saying that when I'm using the that when I'm using the bottom of the chisel, it looks like I'm actually pushing the wood, like when I'm doing this kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
No, you pull back a little bit, almost like you're pushing an edge down. Almost like you're trying to pull the blade.
I don't. I think that just what I'm doing often is I'm trying to cut the hinge on a little tiny piece of wood, and also it's really hard for me to analyze how I'm carving because I'm just doing it. But I don't. I mean, I'm not doing a proto finishing. What I'm doing is I'm moving tiny little pieces of wood. So often I'm just using a tiny little edge, or I'm just lining the chisel up for a cut. Like I'm just like feeling the surface of the wood to see if it's the right shape.
Do you do any scraping?
I do later. I'll do a little bit of scraping sometimes, but mostly I carve it and then I sand it. I use my fingers to. Oh man, we're running out of time here. I'm not going to be able to finish carving this, I don't think. So I'll just do the sanding and a little bit of cutting in to show you how the process works. So you can see this is a very time-consuming process. Carving takes a long time, and that's just how it is. There's no way around it. Even when you're carving wax, which has no grain and is the ideal hardness for carving, like you can get good, really, really good model making wax. It's still just time-consuming, but it's rewarding. You get these beautiful things out of it. And you kind of round these. I like to round the cords out, the legs, but you don't have to. I mean, some of the knotwork carving from the like migration period is flat with just it's just edges like that. It's very much like a drawing on wood. So this is ornamentation. There is no rule book. You can do anything as long as it doesn't affect the structural integrity of the piece. And it's about trying to. I mean, and I like to play with beauty. I like to make something look beautiful. That's what I'm interested in doing. And it's kind of it's a surprisingly kind of a taboo subject in the world of art. Beauty is not something that people talk about a lot. I'm not sure why, but okay.
Now, so I did some carving. I'm running out of time, so I can't. I'm not going to be able to finish doing all the carving on this. But you can see I've cut in this stuff. Now I'm going to do a little bit of sanding on it. I've got some. What is this? 100 grit sandpaper. Actually, I think that's a little bit too coarse. What else do I have here? 240 grit's a good grit. Okay. So I'll rip off a little bit of paper, and I take this on my thumb. This is going to be difficult to see, but I just hold it, and I just take the carved, the edges off the carving, essentially. It's just the little imperfections that are caused by the chisel marks.
think I can go up a grit. And you just have to be careful not to go over these lines so that you know you don't want to take the corners off. There are places where you want those nice sharp corners. And the other thing that happens, and this is a terrible thing, is if you take a piece of sandpaper and you just go over the top of it, you will totally ruin all of the subtle carvings that you've done. Because, you know, I've made this is not, there's nothing flat about this. This is a rounded line, right? And if I sand over the top of that, it's a minute difference in height. You'll just flatten it, and then you'll have this kind of flattened carving. And it's surprising that you'll do that, but I've definitely spent hours and hours on a carving and then gone and sanded the carving away. You know.
Have you ever used small sanding sticks or sanding blocks? And you don't have to repeat the question because I'm on mic.
Okay, sanding blocks, not for the, well, sometimes, yeah. You know, it depends on the size of the carving. With small carvings, it's mostly just a lot of work to glue sandpaper to like a stick, and so my thumbnail is a great thing for that, for just getting, and you can see I'm just taking the roughness out of here. So you can round these lines out a little bit. And then, so I'll start at 100 grit sandpaper or 120 grit sandpaper and kind of smooth these out. And yeah. And this also takes a while. Like when I'm doing carving, I'll often work into the evening, you know, sitting down. You don't really have to be, doing this doesn't take a great deal of attention, so you can listen to the radio or have the TV on or something like that, or sit around. I've got a good friend who comes over, and for years and years and years he was a bachelor, and he'd come over to my shop when I was carving and sit there and tell me all of his lady troubles, and I'd sit there and be a really good listener because I'm not able to talk. Oh my God! Yeah. The Don just said that physically I'm in a position that has got to be uncomfortable, and it's funny because I'll go for, I'll do like 2 months of heavy forging, and like where I'm like making up a bunch of blades and forge welding stuff and grinding and welding, and you're banging and smashing, and I'll go home at the end of the day, and after the first 2 weeks of working like that, you're fine. It doesn't hurt. It's great. But carving, at the end of the day, you're in so much pain. It really hurts because you're crouched over and you're putting all of this pressure onto a tool that you're also holding back. So you're kind of tensing all of your muscles. And for a long time, I've been using one of those chairs that doesn't have a back that you kind of kneel on. But I kneel one knee down and one leg up like that, and my leg that's kneeling down at one point, until I stopped doing that because I realized that my leg was falling completely asleep like 3 times a day, and I'm thinking, I don't know if that's going to be,
can't be healthy.
That can't be good for my body. Yeah, so I stopped doing that. Now I just sit crouched over in a chair. There may be a better way to do this.
Do you consciously take breaks and stretches, or?
Yeah, I'll get to a place where I'm like, ow, and I get up and stretch. But when I'm carving, I do lose track of time, and you can kind of see. I mean, I know this must be pretty tedious to watch, but when you're doing it, you're not aware of the tedium, or I'm not, at any rate. It just kind of goes away. So anyway, I keep sanding and sanding like that, and then I draw in the grace lines. So I draw the grace lines in. We're running out of time. We got 5 minutes? Okay. So I'll draw grace lines in through the whole thing, and then I'll cut them in like so. And this is where I use
And that'll go all the way around there when I'm finished. But then I use a V chisel. And I cut the grace lines in. And you can achieve greater or lesser depth by how you hold the chisel. So, I'm not going to be able to finish this carving today. Do you have any oil? Do you have the oil? Oil? I'm just going to oil this to give you just a sense of what it'll look like. Oh, and then you've got to play. Can you play the video? Okay, cool. And I've put together a little video, a little rag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've put together a little video of what this stuff looks like when it's done. There's some kind of child lock on this. Yeah. Yeah, what? Can you?
We have the plasma cutter.
Yeah, get the plasma cutter. Yeah, we got it. We had to use a tool. Okay, so thank you. So a little bit of oil, and we can oil this. A little bit more oil. I use unboiled linseed oil, and I oil my scabbards with that, and it's lovely stuff, and it creates a nice water protection, and also it brings out this incredible pattern that already exists in the wood.
Jake, I notice you often stain your maple before you oil it to make it darker. I know there's many different techniques people use to do this. What's your technique?
Well, I used to stain my maple. I don't anymore. When I was starting out, I stained my maple, I just felt like it wasn't. It's like a little bit disingenuous or something. I don't know. I just like so I just started using finding dark pieces of maple, because you can get heartwood that's really dark,
sure,
and quite beautiful, or using dark wood, like bog oak, and I've used more recently. I've used African blackwood and some exotic woods, but mostly I don't use exotic woods. I prefer to use wood that's from locally sourced wood. So there you go. That's just starting to oil in there.
Do you use steel wool?
Steel wool? No, not well. I do if it's dark wood, but you can't on maple because it puts black. It ruins it. It makes black marks on it. So anyway, I hope that I don't feel like that was that informative, but I hope you learned something and enjoyed watching me do this carving. And now
we got great close-ups of your hands.
Oh, good.
The shot was really good, and so what you didn't explain, people can see. I mean, they'll be able to re-watch this over and over and see the techniques you're using. So I think it actually is very, very valuable, Jake.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I have a little clip I put together with a finished piece that it's got a little bit of steps of a carving and then the finished product.
Great. So, hey, thanks, Jake, for that. Coming up next at the top of the hour, we have David Delagardelle, formerly of the Mad Dwarf Workshop, now of Cedar Lore Forge, who's going to be showing you some sword design techniques, and he's a true artist. You have to see, if you haven't seen his sketchbook scans that he has online, go to cedarlore.mymiddleearth.com. Is that right, David? And check out his work. It's really amazing. Obviously, mythically inspired. He uses this great word. I thought it was his, but he told me last night that he got it from somewhere else. But it's Tolkien. Okay, well, mythopoetic. And I love that word because you immediately, even if you've never heard it before, you know what it means. So mythopoetic artistry and translated into the sword coming up. And I know you're all anxiously waiting for me to ask the trivia question. And now is not the time I will be asking the trivia question. Keep watching. It'll be soon, maybe,
on.
or perhaps later. So at any rate, check out the slideshow of Jake's amazing carving coming up right away at the top of the hour. David Delagardelle. See you then.